To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meier Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meier Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Hey everyone, we're on with our roundtable with Dr. Paul Meier. Paul, thank you so much yet again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Kristin. It's always my pleasure.
So tonight I was thinking before we hit record, I was like, well, I wonder what we're going to talk about tonight. You know, we usually listeners figure this out, maybe 3 minutes before maybe even sometimes 3 seconds before we hit record. So it was interesting to get on with Paul before we hit record and say, well, what are we talking about? And you mentioned, existential crisis, and I want to...
Yeah, and existential despair and existential crisis.
Despair, yep. So I looked it up on Wikipedia, and here's the definition on Wikipedia. An existential crisis is a moment at which an individual questions if their life has meaning, purpose, or value. It may be commonly, but not necessarily, tied to depression or inevitably negative speculations on purpose in life. As an example, if one day I will be forgotten, what is the point of all my work? This issue of the meaning and purpose of human existence is a major focus of philosophical, traditional discussions of existentialism. So I was just saying to Paul before we hit record, this really hits home tonight. And he said, why? And I said, I'm going to save it for the show.
Yeah, because I wanted to know why. But the reason I thought of it is I saw some new patients today at my office that were suicidal, and they were having despair. And I like one gal that I talked to when she was 14, and she came from a nice family. She comes from a nice family. But when she was 14, she had a crush on a guy. And, they never dated or anything because, she was 14. Mm-hmm. And they didn't really know each other that well, I don't think. But she had a strong crush on a guy, and he moved away. And so she tried to hang herself. And she was unconscious and almost died, but then she changed her mind. She was conscious enough to change her mind, or she would have died. And so, so I asked, what was her purpose in life at age 14? It was to I don't know. I mean, it was to find somebody to validate her, I guess, and make her feel important by falling in love with her. And when you're young, you think, even the songs that young people listen to, and even older people sometimes. Yeah. I can't live without you, and all that sort of stuff.
I don't exist without you.
Can. Yeah, I mean, there's 8 billion people out there, and it hurts when you lose somebody you love, but it doesn't mean life should cease existing.
Right.
And so there's a lot of different reasons why people exist, and some are conscious and some are unconscious. I talked to another person today who is real smart. She's real smart and really nice young lady, and she really came to realize that her purpose in life is to fail. And so she succeeds. She's successful in her career and everything, but her real purpose in life is to fail because she doesn't feel like she deserves to succeed. I think about Richard Nixon. He came in second in his class and at Duke Law School and strove, he worked real hard to excel in life. And he came from a real strict Quaker home where, he had a guilt trip laid on him a lot by his parents. And so he worked his way to the top and became president, but got impeached because he insisted on holding on to 11 minutes of a tape recording that he could have. I'm not saying that he should have, or, what he did was wrong. But I mean, compared to what politicians do today, it's like,
I know.
like cheating
like
at cards.
Crayons, crayons in a coloring book compared to what goes on today.
Yeah. But I think he had an unconscious need to fail, to deep down, because he didn't, he had all that guilt or wanted to get even, or something like that. And I might be totally wrong, but there's reasons why we all live, and there's a reason why most people are in a rat race. But why don't you share, and I'll come back to the rat race later.
Yeah, I was thinking this today, like last week I went to a conference, and usually these days when I go and I do broadcasting, I'm recording shows with speakers or vendors or participants of a conference. I now have a requirement that I take a sound engineer with me because it's a lot of work. I'm usually put in a media room, and for this particular conference, which was wonderful, it was an autism conference for one of our shows, which is called Converge Autism Radio. And this hospital, Springbrook, does incredible work. I mean, it's awe-inspiring what they do. And Dr. Temple Grandin was their keynote speaker, and we've interviewed many, many, many of the other speakers. And here I am by myself. I'm in the media room, and I'm doing show after show after show, and I ended up doing 14 shows in 2 days.
Are you kidding?
No,
wow.
I'm not. And I used to wear that. I used to wear that kind of stuff like a badge of honor. I did 14 shows in 2 days.
I bet you were zonked.
I was exhausted, and they were all good shows. And I interviewed people on the spectrum, people not on the spectrum. It was incredible. And I thought about it after. And not only did I do that, but I also then went home and visited my ex-husband and spent time with him. And there's still some family drama there, and had, a lot of other things that go on. And then I had a couple organizations that want me to now produce and be a co-host on a television show about mental health. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff coming in my direction. Yeah. And I thought, okay, so let's take a step back and let's look at all of these things that are going on and really breathe that in. And let's not do what you've done in the past, which is, oh, I'm such a mighty warrior because the yoke that I can carry on my back is so huge. Which is also so unhealthy.
Yeah, we take on perfectionists take on too much.
So I was very aware of that. As I was going into it, and I gave myself a lot of breaks, and I took myself away from the media room, and I took walks, and I really paid attention to, okay, this is not a competition to show people what a superhuman you are. That's not even a real competition. How can you do this without going to that place, which is very egocentric and not healthy? So I still did the vast number of shows I did, but I did them without, I guess, my ego hanging around my neck around it. And I actually did a better job. And I did it much more gratefully than I have in the past, which I thought was interesting. And I also made a statement to myself. This is the very last conference that you're going to go to where it's just you. You will always have a sound person with you. And if they can't afford to pay for you to bring one, then you're going to say no and decline going. So it was an interesting experience to tell myself those things, you know?
But wore you out?
Yeah, I'm tired. I'm tired.
Yeah.
You know, it's Monday and I am definitely tired. I feel good, but I'm for sure tired.
Yeah. When I was 30 and got out of my residency at Duke, I thought my purpose in life was to do everything I was asked to do, you know, to rescue the world, you know.
Yep.
And I thought that was my duty as a believer in God, and was to do, you know, everything everybody asked me to do. And I tried, and I got more and more and more burned out, and because I was doing too much. And then, you know, one morning I was reading in my Bible where Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I got mad at Jesus for saying that, you know. I said, "No, it's not." You know. And I called up a buddy of mine. We were cadaver mates in medical school, and he was a psychiatrist too. He's passed on since then. But I called him up and said, "Hey, you know, I read this verse this morning, and it doesn't seem, you know, it seems like the Heavenly Father wants me to do so much, and I can't do it, and yet the Bible says that His yoke is easy." And he says, "Well, your Heavenly Father isn't German, you know," because my dad was a German immigrant, and if I got all A's and a B, he'd say, "Now, why'd you get that B?" You know. And so part of the way I saw God was, and what He wanted, what He expected of me, was to do everything everybody asked. And so I slowed down, and I actually got more done when I slowed down and just did a few things than when I tried to do a lot of them. So I thought of that when you talked about, you know, you were having so many demands on you.
It's an interesting thing because I don't have the disease. I think I've worked through a lot of that. Thank goodness for great therapists, where I feel that need to please everybody. I definitely say no, but it doesn't decrease the amount of opportunity that shows up in front of you. I'm asked every day to be a part of something that sounds fantastic. And I have to be very discerning about what I will say yes to. And that's a wonderful problem to have, because there were the years where nobody was asking me to do a damn thing.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
you know, and another thing that messes me up is there's some days that I have a lot of energy, you know, and there's other days when, you know, I mean, I still do a good job and everything, but I just don't have, you know, that much energy. And if somebody asked me to do something 6 months from now on one of my energetic days, then I say, "Oh, sure, I could do that. Yeah, you know, sign me up." You know, I tell my secretary, write it down, and then when it comes time to go travel to that place and do that, you know, then I think, you know, if it's a time when I'm not at an energetic peak, I think, why in the world did I volunteer to do this? You know.
Right, I've done the same thing.
Who
signed me up for this? I did.
Yeah, and I've told when people have asked me to go speak to a group of 100 people in another state or something like that, I ask myself, well, why do I want to go travel to another state and be away from my wife for a couple of days and everything to speak to 100 people when I can get on the phone with Kristin and talk to 10 or 20,000 people on the iPad. I mean, we're right now we're talking to thousands in our listening family, and this is being recorded. So 20 years from now, people will listen to this if they pick this topic to listen to. Yeah. So I mean, see what I mean? It's hard to get our priorities straight sometimes.
It is. And when we tie that into, you know, an existential crisis, I think in the past I would have thought, oh, well, that's when, you know, you feel terrible and there's a lot of pain going on and there's strife and sadness, and I don't think realize that existential crisis can also happen when it's rainbows and sunshine that you see outside, that you're walking through. You're being given what many people would say are gifts, and yet you're still having a crisis because it's a lot. I mean, I'm thinking the same thing. I got invited to speak at 2 different events in May, and it's going to be back-to-back flights and trying to get to both of them. And it's an honor. The organizations that have asked me to speak, it's an honor to do so. And I spent my time trying to convince them on the last phone call, at least one organization, well, I really don't have to be there. Like, we could do this all where you call in.
I did that recently because I had volunteered to speak somewhere, and then I found out it was so far away from big cities that I'd have to ride in a car. I'd have to fly to another city and ride in a car for 3 hours and get there the night before and all that. And so we set it up where I could do it on video. But anyway, we need to get where most people that are listening to us right now don't have the opportunities that we have. They're doing different kinds of jobs and careers and things like that. And I saw another lady today, another new one. I saw some really sad cases today. But one nice thing about being a psychiatrist is because I know in a month they're probably all going to feel better with some counseling.
Right.
But anyway, I saw an elderly woman today who lost her husband, about 5 years ago. But she's still grieving. She's still angry about it, and living alone, and refuses to take an antidepressant. And she's got existential despair. I mean, her existence is sitting there feeling lonely and angry and still grieving all these years later. And I said, well, have you thought about getting a roommate or, the different options for having more fellowship? No, I like living alone. I don't want a roommate. And so, anything I suggested pretty much she'd say no to. And she left like that, but I'm still going to try to persuade her to get into some counseling and maybe take an antidepressant or something. But King Solomon said, I'm looking at the beginning of Ecclesiastes here, and that's a whole book on existential despair, but it has a positive ending. But he starts it with King Solomon started this 3,000 years ago by writing, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, where they return again. All things are wearisome. More than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already long ago. And he goes on, So, and then no one remembers the former generations, even those yet to come. That's that quote that you read. We will not be remembered by those who follow them. But he concludes it. So he goes into the meaninglessness of life to show how a lot of people think. But then he concludes the chapter by saying, the only thing that gives life meaning, and I found that to be true in my life, I know you have too, is to serve God and man. And it's not that like that's the only thing we do. I mean, we have fun, and fellowship, and all that stuff. But to serve God and man, and if you do that, then you have meaning in life.
Sometimes too, it's those little things like I apologized to someone that I didn't get something done as I was supposed to. it fell through the cracks, and I wrote back and said, I'm so sorry I didn't get this done. Here's a discount on blah, blah, blah. And, it was a fair business thing I felt to offer was I didn't get it done. Here's a discount on, the next charge, blah, blah, blah. And like a light, I got an email back saying, I refuse to accept a discount for anything. I know how hard you work. It was a mistake. We all make them.
Yep.
And I will not accept a discount. Keep moving forward. Thank you for resolving the issue. And let's go. And I about burst into tears.
Why?
Not just be at how nice it was to receive that, how nice it was to hear someone acknowledge that you do work really hard, or that I work really hard, and that someone notices, not in a, someone notices me maudlin way, not like that at all. Just like, in the midst of the busyness of everyday life and everybody's going as fast as they can to get as much done as they can, to have someone who puts as much thought into what you do, as much thought as what they put into what they do, and that they notice. And it was just nice to read that and go, okay, right, got it.
Yeah.
It's a nice reminder.
It is nice to be appreciated, and that's something all of you in our listening family right now can latch onto. Is think of somebody today or tomorrow that you can encourage, or you can say something nice for, or even do something nice for without them even knowing it.
Absolutely.
That makes you feel good too. I mentioned earlier the rat race, and let me tell you what I believe the rat race is. I believe that there's 8 billion people on planet Earth, and all 8 billion of us, to some extent or another, feel like a nobody. I think we all have some of those feelings, like we're a nobody, and there isn't a whole lot of meaning to our lives. And I think the vast majority of people go through life trying to prove that they're not a nobody. And they do it through, in psychological terms, through sex, power, and money primarily. And in biblical terms, it's lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. But they do it by, if I have enough money, then I'll have meaning. Then I'll be important. Or power. If I have enough power, politicians or power in a business or whatever. If I have enough power, or even just to dominate other people in their family, if I have enough power, I'll feel significant. Or beauty, or
whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Then and so most people go through life, and they get up in the morning and they go to work and they come home and they do what they can to impress the neighbors and stuff, and they go to bed and sleep, and they do the same thing over and over again throughout their lives, and they just, it's like a rat race. I used to sit in the airport, Kristin, and just, if I was traveling by myself, I'd find some people carrying on a conversation and sit behind them and just listen in. And it seemed like almost always they took turns bragging about themselves, trying to prove their significance to the other person they were talking to. And so you see a lot of that. And so I encourage people to get out of the rat race. It doesn't work. The rat race doesn't work. You can have all the money in the world, and you're still not going to be fulfilled. And that's what Solomon concluded too. He had 1,000, counting wives and concubines. He had 1,000, and he said he did not withhold from himself any pleasure. And he says, but it became meaningless. And he was so rich, he had silver nuggets laying all over his yard and everything. And he was the most wealthy person on earth, and for a while he was the most powerful king on earth. And he said it's all meaningless. And then he said, now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter: fear God, keep His commandments, and help people. This is the duty of all mankind. And he said, if you do that, your life will have meaning. So he lived the rat race and then confessed it.
Yeah, I've actually, experienced that recently where I was at a very very thankfully short-lived, I'd say maybe 3-week relationship with someone new where, like I say, with someone new, I didn't know them before and they were going to be, boarding my horse for me. And I'm dealing with this person and I'm watching how they treat me, how they treat the other people and they'll never listen to this show, so they'll not know that I'm speaking of them, but yeah, absolutely not. There's no depth whatsoever to listen to any of the shows that we do. But, it just in a week period, this is someone who was telling me to answer their phone and telling me I would be coming over to clean up after their dogs and telling me while I'm paying almost what I pay in a mortgage payment or a rent payment, as an example, to board my horse at their facility. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting back and I'm going, well, I don't have a lot of people like this in my life. This is an interesting experience. What is this about? And it was fascinating to realize this is, if Michelle Obama or the Queen of England or, doesn't matter who it was sitting next to them, they would tell them to answer their phone too.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't personal, but I thought, my goodness, this is someone who inherited money and who wields it in an immature fashion, as if that is what gives them the right to treat others less than.
So what was that? What was that? So that person was obviously narcissistic.
Oh my goodness. I wanted to do a show called the quote unquote your friendly narcissistic neighbor.
So what was was it a he? It was a guy, right?
It was a she. It was a she, inherited from a.
What was her purpose in life?
What do you
think her purpose in life is?
To teach everyone that comes across her path that they deserve better and to run.
Well, that's the result of her life. But her purpose in life is
to remind you what your value is. Yeah, that's their purpose in life. Absolutely.
Yeah, she wants to feel more important than everybody else.
Yep.
And she wants to have power. So usually we prove usually in the rat race, people for different reasons, they're either attracted to sex, power, or money. So either sexual prowess or power, or if I have enough money, I'll feel important.
Oh, this was if I have enough money. Power. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was an exercise in 3 weeks of me saying no, 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 no. And finally saying, here's my attorney also saying no. Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Because whenever you threaten their money, boy, do they hear you. And I don't like having to go to those places because that's not who I am. But for people like that, that's the only way that they hear you is when you're going to threaten the very thing that they've placed all their power in, which in the case of this woman is the inherited money. So it was a very short-term, interesting experience where I went, that was interesting. And I'm getting out of there.
Yeah.
But I thought, how very sad.
Yeah. She'll have no joy.
No.
If you live for the rat race, you really don't have joy in life. You have, you come to realize like that your definition of existential crisis, you come to a point where you realize that life is meaningless and when you die, nobody's going to remember you. And then what good has it done for her to control people, manipulate people, use people, and all that sort of thing? A reporter asked John Rockefeller when he was the richest man on earth. A reporter said, Mr. Rockefeller, how much money will it take for you to feel important? And this is a true story. And he scratched his chin and looked at her and said, good question, young lady. It'll take just a little bit more than I'll ever have.
Right.
Isn't that a great answer? In other words, no matter how much he has, it won't be enough.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meier of the Meier Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meier Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
Here's what was interesting. We're doing this video that 8 of our podcasters who all own their own businesses are spending their own money to fly out to where I live in order to be a part of this documentary or docuseries that we're creating called Mental Health Roundtable. They're spending their own money to do this. The production company that came to me and said, we want to film this, they're donating their time to do this. These are incredible human beings that do nothing but good things in the world. And they are donating their time. Exactly.
They
and
feel
they're
good
coming
if
in.
they're helping people.
Exactly. And this woman, no less than 8 times, tried to convince me to rent her home for God knows how much a night, to have all of these podcasters come and stay in her home, push for me to do this. No care about who these people are, about how much money they're spending, about the time that they give, about what it is they do in the world, just that she'll get paid for them to stay in her home. And when I said no 8 times, and then I finally got a tour of the home, it doesn't even have floors. The electrical outlets are still hanging from the walls. And I thought, this person has no care whatsoever about these people, about their time. And it was just I feel for her, but I thought, my goodness, to be so without shame and so without care for others and what they do in the world, that you would try to push an agenda to see how much money you can get out of a bunch of do-gooders. That is pretty horrific.
How do you think, Kristin, how do you think people who really have a meaningless life, how do you think they came to the conclusions that they had, like that they can't live without somebody, or they deserve to fail, or it's just a matter of going to work, eating, going to bed, going to work, eating, going to bed, just going in circles and not, doing anything. How do different people, how do you think different people, what are the influences that lead people to make real lousy choices about their purpose in life?
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, I would think burying your pain, never acknowledging your pain. I don't know, Paul. You've had, you have more experience than I do with this, but I mean, because I have done those things too, but not to that extent. But instead, I was angry, but then I felt extreme sadness because I do know some of what slipped out from this person's past experience that they've not dealt with and wrote a free pass to that was horrific. And I think, wow, the lengths that some of us go through to avoid pain is astounding.
Yeah, I think that's a real good one. That's a real good one, because when we have pain, we can either face it and cry about it and share it with people, a counselor, with friends, and do something about it, or we can get busy in the rat race and so busy that we don't look at it, that we just bury it. So that is a really good one. I think a lot of it comes from childhood too.
Absolutely.
They say, in psychiatry research, that about half of our basic personality is formed by the 3rd birthday, and about 85% of our basic way of looking at life is formed by our 6th birthday. So a lot of our purpose in life is already ingrained in us by the time we're 6. You see your parents and what they do and what they're living for or not living for, and how they treat you. If they treat you really bad, like I saw another person today whose mom and dad, her dad was an alcoholic, and her mom and dad always fought with each other, and then they finally split up. And this woman is an adult now. She still feels guilty today. She feels guilty because she blames herself for her parents being miserable and splitting up. And I said, now how could you possibly blame yourself for that?
Right.
And but as a child, she took on the counselor role. So she, there's different roles that we can play in a family. And so she tried to fix them. She spent her purpose in life when she was 6 years old was to fix her mom and dad, and
Right.
she failed to fix them. And so she feels like a failure. So she feels like she deserves to fail now. Isn't it? I mean, it's. But
Yeah.
when we talked about it, she said, "That's really pretty stupid," And I more or less agreed with her. Yeah, that is, isn't it?
But that's the thing
we make re-decisions. So she
Yeah.
decided that her meaning in life came from rescuing people, and then today she made what we call a re-decision. She decided, I'm not going to live for that purpose anymore. I'm going to live for a different purpose.
And that's the thing. We can change our minds. I remember, the people in my neighborhood know what it is I do. We're going to be filming this show right here in the neighborhood. They know it's a mental health show. And, hearing from this person right out of the gate was, well, I don't need to go to counseling because I don't need a crutch.
Yeah.
I thought, do you know?
I wish everybody'd go to counseling for a while.
Oh
just for
my
personal
gosh.
growth.
Absolutely. I thought, my God, that's how you look at counseling, that it's a crutch. It is not strength to shoulder those burdens alone.
Mm-hmm.
That is not strength. It just isn't.
And our unconscious drives us in the wrong directions.
Absolutely.
Counseling helps us to figure that out, like this lady did today. She figured it out, and
Right.
And made a new decision. For those in our listening family again that are listening to us, you may think, well, in order to have meaning, I've got to have I've either got to be a psychiatrist or run a podcast company that helps people all over the world through 1,600 different podcasts. And you don't. I mean, you can be a carpenter or a plumber or a teacher or any job, and have meaning in your life if you look for opportunities to help people along the way. Just see somebody in need and reach out and love somebody. And loving and being loved is where it's at. And you don't have to be in a counseling career or something like that in order to do that. I mean, I'm blessed to be able to do that. I'm able to do that every day, and I go home feeling so good at the end of the day that I've helped people. And I didn't feel real good today because I heard so much pain from new clients.
Right. How do you process that, Paul, when you have, a lot of new clients and they just happen to show up, in the same week or the same day? And
yeah,
how
today was
do
one of those days.
How do you do that? How do you process that when you go home?
Well, when I was in residency and I had a day like that, I would literally cry. I mean, I would feel so. I'd go home and feel depressed. But we had a lot of profs at Duke. We had 2 professors per student. We were spoiled, and so I shared that with a prof that I liked, and one of my teachers, and he said there's a difference between having empathy for somebody and caring and wanting to help them, and a kind of sympathy where you think, he said unconsciously. Now here's what he thought and that he saw in my life, and I think he was probably right. He said unconsciously, you've learned that if you take on their suffering and you go home and cry for them and suffer for them, that somehow that's going to magically make them better. And it doesn't. He says, no, I'm glad that you care. So you can care about these people without going home and letting it weigh heavy on your mind, because it's not your job to. You can't cure them magically when you're not not sharing with them. So that helped me a lot.
Yeah,
but,
that helps.
I still felt a little bit that way though, 50 years later, today.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
40 years later.
I think about that too. I think about that also. And I think about, okay, well, where's the line between how many times I've been codependent and I've enabled people, which is not healthy for them and not healthy for me. So that nudge of encouragement, since I'm not a therapist, it's not my job. No one's walking into an office for me to help them with their psychiatric or psychological issues. But I've, been very codependent and try to fix everything for somebody. And I've had to learn how to back off from doing that while also still being someone who tries to be helpful. And that's an interesting dance. You can't, it's like that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. That's a really interesting dance for someone who has been a lifetime gold star codependent.
Yeah. I told a lady today, I had a lot of good experiences today, actually. Some of them were painful, but, they were still good experiences. But I told a lady today who came in, and we've got a day program, as you know, where people come that are depressed enough to where it's hard to go to work, and they have death wishes and things like that. But they're really good, normal, loving, successful people who are going through depression. But anyway, she checked in today to our day program, and they come for about 3 weeks and go to therapy 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks. And I told her, I said, while you're here, we're not going to tell you what to do. We're going to tell you what we see. Our job isn't to think for you or tell you what to do with your life. Our job is to dig and probe and do psychological testing and try to get, study your body language and talk and try to figure out what's going on in your unconscious and then, share that back with you. And then you have to decide what you're going to do with that information. And she liked that, so.
Yeah. So what do you say, Paul, when you have someone that comes in your office and they are a really good person, they do good things in the world, but they have this tendency to have always enabled people or been codependent, and they come to you and their existential crisis is, well, I still have a lot of people knocking on the door for me to help them. So how do I determine what is helpful and what is hurtful?
That's sort of a long discussion, there's no magical step 1, 2, 3, but they need to be in therapy and talk about what they see as their responsibility and what's reasonable and what's not reasonable and how you can actually hurt people by doing too much for them. And there's an example. If you and some friends went on a camping trip and where you're going to spend, like, let's say 3 days in the woods, and so you each had a backpack that's let's say 20 pounds heavy with all the stuff in it that you need, and then one of your friends is the cook, and so your friend has 20 pounds in her backpack or his backpack plus another 30 pounds of pots and pans. And if the people are kind and loving, they'll each take one pot and put it in their backpack, and they'll share his overburden. See what I mean? But if you're codependent, you'll find somebody else that has a 20-pound bag and say, "Here, let me carry that for you," and you'll carry 40 pounds, and that person carries nothing.
Right.
And you think you're doing that person good, but really you're doing that person harm. You're teaching that person to be a narcissistic sociopath, that they deserve to not carry a burden.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so that's sort of where I would lead the conversation with somebody that that does that, because are you really helping them? You know, even it's hard to know what the right thing is to do with people that are poverty stricken, because you want to give them food if they're hungry, but you know, if you give them food, like I say, if you give them food and a fishing pole and teach them how to fish, then you're really being kinder than if you just keep on bringing them food every day, because then you're teaching them how to be responsible and like themselves and stuff like that.
I've said this before, and I'll say it one more time because I think it's worth saying again. I had a wonderful therapist who said this to me about my ex-husband. Kristin, every time you think about enabling him, I want you to picture stabbing him with a knife, because that is how bad you're hurting him.
Mm-hmm.
And magically, I jest, because it wasn't magically. It took a long period of time. And when you're someone who, like, you know, how I am, and I'm not putting myself on a pedestal for this, because this has its own downside that we'll get into on another show, but I tend to like steamroll. Okay, got to get this done, get this done. Okay, we're moving forward to our healing. Boom, boom, boom. We're on the expressway to healing. Boom, 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 boom. That has its own issues. But I had to learn that my road to healing, healthy or not, sometimes healthy, sometimes not, sometimes in the middle, is not someone else's road. And it is not for me to judge whether they are going fast enough or too slow on their road to healing. And so to sit back and watch someone I love, be it my ex-husband or my son or whoever, and see them going through what they need to go through without my interference or my input, was me finally growing up, not being codependent, not being an enabler, and not being a judgmental person.
Yeah.
Which it takes a lot of growing up. I didn't realize how judgmental I actually was wrapped around my, oh, I'm such a good person.
Well, you are a good person.
I am, but I mean, even still, even with that going, oh boy, I was really putting a time limit on when they're supposed to like get their stuff together. And that is none of my business. That is none of my business.
Yeah, I've done that plenty of times as a psychiatrist too.
Yeah.
You know, get mad at people for not getting well quick enough.
Yeah. That's rough business.
And you do what you can, and then the rest is up to them.
That's right. That's right. And then you watch what they're supposed to do and how God and, you know, all these things work in their lives, and their time is perfect for them. And that's not your time, because your life is different. I think those kinds of realizations are what help you stay away from those existential crises of your own.
You know, I just remembered something else, Kristin. There was a study done. I'm trying to remember. Oh, I know where. USA Today. I guess that still exists. It used to be a real popular newspaper. I think it still exists today, but it used to be on all the newsstands when there were newspapers. You know,
it does. It's still in hotels. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, they did a poll once a year where they asked people that were, I think, 21 years old, or, you know, they get, you know, so many thousand random people, and ask them, what's your purpose in life? That's exactly what we're talking about right now. What's your purpose in life? And when I was 21, because they've been doing this for like, you know, 50, 60 years. And back in the ancient times when I was 21, back in the 1700s, they you know, when they asked people their meaning in life, it was to have a family and to contribute to society and you know, be maybe financially secure or something like that. Those came up at the top. And now, in the most recent one that I saw, the number one answer was, what's your purpose in life? To enjoy today.
Ooh.
Enjoy today.
Yeah.
And the goals were narcissistic goals. They weren't, and I'm not saying everybody in the younger generation is that way, but a higher percentage of them are than used to be. And not very many of them said, to love others and help others and contribute to society. And I mean, that choice doesn't come up much anymore. When I was a kid in Michigan, the farmers would go out on the street by their home and set up a table and put a bushel basket full of apples there and a sign that said, $1 an apple, and put a basket to put the money in. And then they'd come at the end of the day and take their money and go home, go back to their house. Now if you did that, the table would be gone. The money would be gone. The apples would be gone. Everything would be gone. Things are different now than they used to be.
Absolutely.
And it's not like it's all bad today. There's a lot of wonderful young people, but there's just a higher percent. I mean, look at on college campuses. If you don't think the way they think, then they'll destroy it. They'll burn down the building. You have to be politically correct, or you'll be destroyed. I mean, there's some really sick purposes in life that people have today. Just really sad. And
yes.
How much time do you spend listening to the news, Kristin? Is there an average amount of time per day that you watch the news or listen to it?
What's interesting? I grew up, watching it every night, and I've consistently watched it less and less and less. And now, I mean, I do have an idea of what's going on out in the world, because you hear it from so many other different sources. But to be honest, I probably tune in on my phone. I'll go to Google News, which is the most random that I could find. I don't want to hear just from this place or just from that place. I want to kind of get a mix of different things, because one side is telling a smidge of the truth and the other is telling a smidge of the other, and the rest of it is a bunch of baloney.
Yeah, so much. Again, reporters used to want to report
the news.
Come to your own.
Yeah.
And now they want to lie. They'll willfully lie.
Yep.
Because their goal is to persuade you to think the way they think, even if they have to lie to do that. I mean, that's narcissistic.
Absolutely.
But you don't listen to the news very much every day, right?
No,
Maybe,
I
3 or 4
once
minutes,
a week.
5 minutes.
Once a week, I read the whole thing, and maybe 2 minutes a day I hear a snippet of something of what's going on. That's it. It used to be a lot more.
My wife and I used to listen, maybe a couple hours a day, because I really am interested in what's going on in the world. But the older we get, the more we think, it's just too painful. I mean, I want to know what's going on in the world, but the news, it doesn't have a whole lot of warm, nice stories about good things that are happening in the world. It's all the people raping, and killing, and all the horrible things that are going on in the world. And there is so much meaninglessness. And
I try to find those beacons of light that are out there and gain some insight from that. But I now don't spend a lot of my time there, and I won't ruin a wonderful meal that has been prepared by someone that I care about by sitting down and watching the news while I eat.
I mean, I don't want to stick my head in the sand. I do want to know what's going on in the world, but there's a lot of sad things going on. Look at Venezuela. They were the wealthiest nation in South America. Now the people are starving to death because one guy, the corrupt socialist ruler, he gets billions and billions and billions. Everybody else is starving. Talk about the ultimate narcissism.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you see that, and you just think, how can that
be?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to what we're talking about, and this is deserved of so many more shows. I mean, narcissism has always been there. It will always be there, and it is so it's not even on the rise anymore. It just is. And if you're not awake to that fact, then you really are sticking your head in the sand.
Even driving on the road, if you go, people like, there's some places where people are still really nice. And Kansas is one of those. I mean, I live in Texas, and there's a lot of nice people here in Texas too. But I don't know if you've ever driven through Kansas. If you drive through Kansas and you come up behind somebody, they'll pull off to the side of the road and wave at you as you go past.
Absolutely, that's where I live too. Same way.
Yeah, and I lived in California for 4 years, and I'm not saying everybody in California is a narcissist or anything, but here in California, I think the more crowded the place is, like New York and Los Angeles, places like that, the more a higher percentage of people become narcissistic, or life becomes meaningless to them. But in California, you don't blink when you want to change lanes, because if you do, the people will speed up and not let you in.
Oh yeah, same with Atlanta. I don't. The minute I get to Atlanta, I do not. I turn my blinker on 3 seconds before I'm moving into the next lane. Yeah. So I think
they did a study in New York City. In general, psychiatric studies show that about 1 out of 4 people are what they call neurotic. And neurotic, that's not a nice word. It just means, it's because they're good people. But 1 out of 4 people are sad and depressed and anxious enough to where it's interfering with their life. But in Manhattan, where several million people live in a tiny area, it was 40% instead of 25% that were miserable, and depressed and anxious.
Well, I'd say, to give our listeners hope for tonight, the things that they can think about. There absolutely is. No, there absolutely is. The steps towards, navigating out of these existential crises that we all have, because no one gets off scot-free here. We all have these many, many times throughout the course of our lifetime. So what would you say, Paul, are some things to help you look at these crises and see them as an experience to evolve from, instead of something to run from, dull with substances or toxic people or whatever, but actually look at them as, this is an experience that I can grow from, and that is a worthy endeavor?
Yeah, one nice thing about being in my 70s, I'm in my early 70s, and is I was a good kid when I was young. I mean, I've always been a person that cared about others and things like that. But I was so naive when I was young, and I thought, well, when I get my MD degree, I'm finally going to feel significant, and I was happy to graduate. But once I crossed that stage and got my diploma, I felt empty. I remember standing there behind the stage waiting for my parents and thinking, everywhere I go, my butt still follows me, and I felt, I felt like it was meaningless after all that effort. But as time goes on, I appreciate age in that regard. I've grown in so many different ways that now my life is very happy. I mean, I was happy then too, but I have a very happy life, and I'm really happy the vast majority of the time. I will see a sad commercial of people starving to death in Africa and cry, because I'm empathetic. But I have a very happy life, and I think it's because I really enjoy helping people to help themselves. And so I go home at the end of every day feeling like, boy, I've contributed to people's lives. And like I say, you don't have to be a therapist to do that. You can do that just by, saying something positive to the people you work with. And my God is a real big part of my life, and I chat with him. I chat with him during the day and laugh with him and cry with him, and that's a big part of my life. And doing this with you is huge.
Yeah.
I saw, you invited me to do this. I think it's been about a year and a half ago now.
Right.
And I enjoyed, doing that with you. And I enjoy talking to our listening family. You and I are talking, but you and I are both thinking in terms of the thousands of people that are going to be listening to us, and it's almost like they're present. Like I can look around the room and see them on the walls, and to be able to reach out to, if we can bring meaning today to people's lives, instead of them being in the rat race. If they get out of the rat race and quit thinking that sex, power, and money are going to get you anywhere,
right,
and instead learn to love.
That's exactly how I feel. That's exactly how I feel. I feel when I left my very busy last few days, tired, still sort of coming out of the fog of being tired, and I had to sit and think, okay, what you're tired, you feel drained, things are bothering you that normally wouldn't bother you, Kristin. Give yourself a break. Like the self-talk, like we've talked about on, the most recent shows we've done, that inner self-talk is so kind to myself now in comparison to years before. And that in and of itself is so helpful to me, because the kinder that I am to myself in my own head, the more I am able to help other people, as much as I try to anyway, without being an enabler. And that is what makes me feel good. That is what makes me get up and get on the air, and even when I'm tired or whatever. And also it's also what helps me say, today I canceled 2 things. I was not going to cancel doing this with you tonight, Paul, because this fills me up, but I canceled 2 other equally important things, because I just knew that, okay, I've got 7 things on my plate today. That's a lot after the 4 days I've had. And I'm not willing to cancel Paul. I'm not willing to cancel these other
sometimes
things.
Sometimes we do,
and sometimes we do. Yeah. Yeah, and that's okay. And I knew you'd be fine, but I was like, no, because that gives something to me too. But I canceled a couple other things and moved them to another day, because that's part of me taking care of myself. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, listeners, is the things that you can do for you that are being kind to yourself, those kindnesses to yourself, even if it's possibly disappointing someone else, those are extremely important. Those are extremely valid. So go ahead and do those things. That will help you navigate your next existential crisis, because I'm sorry to tell you, they never go away. You're going to have those the rest of your life.
Find somebody to love, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, you need to have 2 or 3 friends.
Yes.
That you can share anything with. You can confess your sins to, or your sorrows, or your failures, or share your successes with, and that makes life a lot more meaningful.
Absolutely.
Helping others, but also taking care of yourself. If you want to love other people, like Kristin was just sharing with you have to fill your own love tank.
Yes.
So you have to love yourself in a healthy way, and let other people love you, and fill your love tank up. Then when it's full, you'll have love to pour out on other people.
Absolutely. And that's a great stop to tonight's show, to our next conversation about this, because we'll talk about it more. But yeah, just know life's difficult. You're going to have more of these crises that come up. And the more you take care of yourself, being kind to yourself and others while you do so, the easier it's going to be as you navigate these crises that come up again and again.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Paul. for coming on a Monday night, the beginning of.
Yeah, we got on a philosophical topic tonight.
We did. We needed to, though. That was meant to be. Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to our listeners for another episode of Roundtable with Dr. Paul Meier on Mental Health News Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meier Clinics, please visit our website at meierclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.